On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to a special new series on JLF's Brave New World. Voices of Faith, which we will broadcast over the coming weeks, has been presented by the Kamini and Vindi Banga Family Trust. Our magazine partner is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. With the onset of the festive season, what better way to mark the eternal fight of good over evil than to discuss one of the greatest pieces of Indian literature, the Ramcharitmanas, Then and Now. Pavan K. Varma and Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni in conversation. The Ramcharitmanas is one of the greatest lyrical compositions in Indian literature. Written in the 16th century by Tulsidas and Awadhi, which was the language of the masses rather than Sanskrit, it broke away from literary traditions and made Lord Ram more accessible and relatable to the layperson. The story of Lord Ram, however, is incomplete without referring to the strength, knowledge, and perseverance of his consort Sita and her central role within the narrative. In his recent work, The Greatest Ode to Lord Ram, writer, politician, and former diplomat Pavan K. Varma has selected some of the most inspiring stanzas and offering a succinct commentary for each that capture the very core of the original work. Academic and author Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni's novel The Forest of Enchantments is an evocative telling of the goddess Sita. Her innate strength is a testament to the power of the female. Together, they discuss the various philosophical aspects of the Ramcharitmanas and the characters that shine through. Pavan K. Varma is an award-winning writer, diplomat, and now politician, where he was till recently a member of parliament in Rajya Sabha, India's upper house, and earlier advisor to the chief minister of Bihar. He is the author of over a dozen best-selling books, including Ghalib, The Man, the Times, The Great Indian Middle Class, The Book of Krishna, Being Indian, Becoming Indian, and Chanakya's New Manifesto. He has served as ambassador in several countries, including Bhutan, with the director of the Nehru Center in London. He was the official spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs and the Director General of the Indian Council of Cultural Relations, and press secretary to the President of India. He was the National General Secretary and National Spokesperson of the Janata Dal United. In 2018, he was conferred an honorary doctorate by the Sri Sharada Institute of Indian Management for his book Adi Shankaracharya, Hinduism's Greatest Thinker. Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni is an award-winning and best-selling novelist, poet, activist, and teacher of writing. She has won many awards, including the American Book Award and the Premier Scano. Her work has been published in over 100 magazines and anthologies, while her books have been translated into over 29 languages. Several of her works have been made into films and plays. She teaches at the internationally acclaimed writing program at the University of Houston, Texas. Please do remember to ask questions or comment by posting these in the comment box below, and we will post them of Chitra and Pavan Varma at the end of the session. And should any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on Jaipur Litfest JLF on YouTube and JLF Litfest on Facebook. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ramcharitmanas, Then and Now. Pavan K. Varma and Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni in conversation, presented by the Kamini and Vindi Banga Family Trust. Pavan, Chitradi, over to you.
Hello, it is a great pleasure to be here for JLF and to be in conversation with you, Pavanji, and happy Dasera to you as well.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start a little further back. I'm sure our audience today would like to know, how did you come to writing? Because your career path is quite different. So how and when did you come to writing?
Well, I was fond of writing, but I think very often it's the first book, if it does well, which gives you the courage to go on. And my first book was a biography of the great Urdu poet Mirza Ghalib, which I wrote in the 80s, called Ghalib, the Man, the Times. and it did well. It did very well. And then one book followed the other, and by now, if you include my translations also, it's been 24 books. Of course, I'm not a full time writer because I was, uh, till recently, when I joined politics, first a professional diplomat, and then politics is a very zealous mistress. But I persevere.
That's wonderful, and it's very inspiring for people. One of the questions that uh, beginning writers often ask me, and my life is much less hectic than yours. I teach and I write, and I do a little bit of work in the community, take care of family, but these are very ordinary things. So one of the things people would like to know is, how do you make time? How do you create a writing schedule? How can one have a really demanding full-time job like yours? And what's your strategy to continue being a writer?
Well, this is a question that's been asked to me many times, and I must give an honest answer, which may sound a bit pompous, but it's that I write in the crevices of the day. Uh, the only time it's made a difference is during this dreadful COVID period, when enforced lockdown at home, the inability to travel, to be as active outside the house politically and otherwise, has made me finish my current book, which I'm writing, much faster because I'm putting in consistent hours of work on it. Otherwise, I write in the crevices of the day.
That is very inspiring. It's inspiring to me too, because just yesterday I was complaining to my family that by the time I finish taking care of all of you, I have no time to write. But now I'm inspired. And I love that phrase, crevices of the day. So, moving to your current book, how did you decide to write this book and why?
I've written over a period of time many books which relate to the great civilization of which we are legatees. We are a young republic, but an ancient civilization. And one of the things that occasionally uh, makes me despondent is that such a great civilizational legacy has a lot of people today who are either ignorant about it or indifferent about it or incurious about it. So it's a great loss. So I have written on the Mahabharata, Yudhishthir and Draupadi, which is a long poem. I've written on Krishna. My last book was on Adi Shankaracharya, and now this book on Tulsidas is Ramcharitmanas. You see, I come from UP, and the Ramcharitmanas is, as was rightly described, it's more or less the Bible of the people of North India. The language in which it is written, the sheer lyricism of its poetry, the sheer earthiness of its similes, and the great retelling of a remarkable story has made some of it literally to be on the lips of ordinary people who may not even be educated formally, but they know it. And in my family, of course, the Ramcharitmanas was something you quoted just off the cuff. And as indeed you quoted Mirza Ghalib off the cuff. So it was a kind of composite background. But I felt that the Ramcharitmanas is an epic. And few people perhaps have the patience or the time to go through it from page one to page end. So my idea was to take some stanzas out of it, selections which specially appeal to me, and put them together with a meaning both in English and Hindi, and a commentary that gives the context and background to what those lines were about. So, in a sense, making the Ramcharitmanas accessible to people in a wider audience. That was my idea.
That is really a wonderful endeavor. And I loved what you said about us being an ancient civilization, although we tend to forget a lot of the true values, the deep values of that civilization. So it's beautiful to have the ancient texts made relevant to today's world. I think that has been my enterprise also in writing books
Yes.
like Palace of Illusions, Forest of Enchantments. Now, I wrote in Forest of Enchantments, I wrote Sita's story because it resonated inside me. And I felt that many people in our current generation did not understand Sita's character enough. Did you feel that about Lord Ram? That there's maybe not a proper understanding of who he is and what he stands for?
No, I think that the people of India understand divinity is a very complex thing in the Hindu tradition. And one of the things about it is not to constrain it in monochromatic terms. In other words, if divinity is plenitude, then it must be in its shagun or incarnate form be displayed in as many facets as possible. So you have the Trinity, of course, and then you have, if Krishna is Leela Purushottam, then Ram is Maryada Purushottam. And in many respects, the two are great contrasts. Ram is always correct, and Krishna steals butter and is precocious even as an adolescent. Ram is strictly monogamous, and Krishna, as you know, frolics in the groves of Vrindavan, etc. But the idea is to show divinity in as diverse a form as possible, and Ram has always stood Sri Ram has always stood in the minds of people as Maryada Purushottam, which means the epitome of rectitude, of correct behavior, of making the right choices even when there are other choices to be made. A person who is a role model for people to follow in terms of his unerring devotion to do the right thing. This is another matter if some of the actions he take are not considered right by some people, but you will give this benefit of doubt to Lord Ram that he himself takes those actions which he considers to be the best in the situation. And in many ways, Chitraji, you will see in the Ramayana, in Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas, his behavior is impeccable. Now, for instance, he is being banished from his kingdom unfairly by a conspiracy. And he should be angry. For instance, it's a human reaction because, of course, he knows the truth. But when he meets Kaikeyi, another very interesting character, and I know you are taken up with many of the women in the Ramayana epic, when he meets Kaikeyi, he says to her with complete equipoise, complete equanimity, complete composure, he says to her, Sun Janani, soi sut bada bhagi, jo pitumat bachan anuragi. Listen, mother, that child is blessed who follows or who has the opportunity to follow with love the command of his parents. And he then goes away into exile. So that is the kind of role that Sri Ram is associated with. And this happens several times during the telling of the epic. So he is this in the eyes of people. And I think that is well known. As far as Sita is concerned, I think Tulsidas devotes much more time to Sita than does Valmiki. And for Valmiki, Sita, again, I must make a slight digression to say to you that all divinity in the Hindu philosophical and religious tradition is schizophrenic. At one level, it is nirguna. It has no attributes. It is undifferentiated consciousness. It is akhand, indivisible, adrisht, unseen, achintya, beyond thought. It is, and nothing else but it is. It is a cosmic consciousness that pervades the universe. And at another level, it becomes, because people never lose sight of the fact that that is its original nature, they take great delight in embellishing it with attributes. So it's maybe not very transparent to an outside observer, not from the Hindu tradition, but in the Hindu tradition, even the devotees are harmonious schizophrenics. They, at one level, look upon Ram as Brahm, that Nirgun cosmic consciousness. And what he is doing in his human avatar is a derogation from that ultimate reality, where he is behaving like a human only for the purposes that he must fulfill in that role, untouched by it. And similarly,
Yes, it is. It is a great paradox, isn't it? It is
yes,
a
but
wonderful
it has to be
paradox.
understood in the right context, and with the same with Sita. She is the incarnation of Lakshmi. And in that sense, she is as powerful as Ram. Again, the Devi notion in Hinduism uh, equates almost at the same level the goddess, like no other religion does, with God. The god and goddess are conjoined by the spiritual umbilical cord. And so Shiva has Parvati, and Vishnu has Lakshmi, and Brahma has Saraswati, and so on and so forth. And in fact, in the 6th century Common Era, you had a important text called Devi Mahatmya, which said that Devi is the only reality, and even the gods are subservient. So at one level, the Devi is a very powerful concept, and for Tulsidas, Sita was something that he gave full credit to. I mean, when he describes her beauty, also in one of the most beautiful lines in the Ramcharitmanas, he writes, "Sundarta kahu sundar kare, sundarta kahu sundar kare, chabigra deep shikha jan ubarai." She even makes the beautiful more beautiful, as if in a pavilion full of beautiful portraits, which is dark, somebody lights a lamp and the whole pavilion comes alive. Now, it's a beautiful simile, but this is how he describes her. And when they first meet Ram and Sita in that bower in the garden, uh, he says that how can you compare her beauty? How can you? There is no comparison to her beauty.
Sorry, I don't hear you anymore. Can you check your sound for a moment?
I am not muted.
Pavan's
Yes.
fine, Chitra. I think maybe your connection just
Okay.
went for a
I,
second.
I
We
hear
can hear
it
him.
now.
Go ahead.
Yes, so I was saying that he describes her beauty in ways. I mean, he says in a line, he says, "Siya soba nahi jai bakhani." It's difficult to describe her sheer beauty. She's Jagdambika. Jagdambika Roop Manukhani. She is the treasure house of all that the female deity stands for, and her beauty is beyond description. So that is Sita. And in fact, at one point when they are in exile, Tulsidas writes, Ubhay beach se sohat kaise. Between the two brothers as they walk, how attractive does Sita look? Brahma Jiva Maya Bich Jaise. As though between the Brahm, which is Ram, and the Jeev, which is Lakshman, she is the connecting cord of Maya, and Maya is a very powerful Devi in the Hindu notion of cosmology and in philosophy. So that is his description of Sita. And Ram, by the way, in his human avatar, is besotted by her.
Yes, the love story of Ram and Sita, perhaps we could call it the most ancient, the most primal love story in the world.
Yeah.
And I think this would be a great time for you to maybe read from your book for our audience.
What did I? No, if you want me to read, the most beautiful lines are at the time of the Jaimal, where she's carrying a garland to put round Ram's neck, which is the first part of the wedding ceremony in the Hindu tradition. And Tulsidas writes, and I'll just read one, but they're so beautiful. Sakhina madhya siya so hati kaise, छवि ग्रह दीप छवि गण मध्य महा छवि जैसे सखिन मध्य with her friends around her सखिन मध्य सिय सो हति कैसे छवि गण मध्य महा छवि जैसे कर सरोज जय माल सुहाई विश्व विजय शोभा जहि लाई. Please see the cadence of the words. And then he says tan sakochu man param uchaho. Now, in this one line, he captures both the internal enthusiasm of a bride to be and her natural diffidence meeting for the first time her husband, as used to happen very often in Hindu marriages. So she is both withdrawing into herself, while her mind soars at the fact that what she had desired is coming to fruition. So the line Tulsidas uses is Tanasakochu, Man Parama Uchahu, Good Prema Lakhi, Parayinakahu. This deep secret of my love I cannot reveal to anyone. And then for the first time, when in the ritual of marriage she comes close to Ram to put the garland, she says, Jai Sameep Ram Chabi Dekhi, Rahi Jani Kori Chitra Avarekhi. She was frozen like the beautiful portrait when she came close to Ram and saw his profile, saw him right in front of her. So, I mean, I can go on reading paragraphs, many of them I know anyway. But that is the beauty of their relationship, and I want to make a point here. This relationship between Ram and Sita has the Shringar Ras. There is the element of sensuality which is actually heightened by the degree of restraint that both show in expressing their emotions publicly. Sri Ram also thinks about Sita after having sighted her. And she also thinks of him. But they are not Krishna and Radha. There's no Jaidev writing the Geet Govind about the erotic love play between Radha and Krishna. Theirs is the restraint of the traditional marriage heightened by the suppressed narrative of sensuality. Not suppressed voluntarily, but because of the public constraints on what is called today PDA, public display of emotion. So that is the kind of relationship between them, and it's very human. Ram, while thinking of her, starts comparing her with the moon. When he sees the moon, as you may be familiar with these lines, he first compares her with the moon, and then he begins to see everything in the moon which is wrong and which cannot equal Sita. At another point, he starts comparing her with the other goddesses. And then he says, no, Saraswati talks too much. Parvati is Ardhanareshwar, half man, half woman, Shiva and Parvati. And Lakshmi came from the great churning of the oceans. She was Swayambhu, self-born. So Sita is greater than even the other goddesses, including Lakshmi, of whose incarnation she is. So this is the kind of rumination Ram is having about her. And when he's in the forest and she's been abducted, how human can godhood become? He says to Lakshman, Ghan Gamand Nab Garajat Gora. Ghana Gamand Nab Garajat Gora. It's about to rain and the clouds and the thunder is on. Ghanagamanda Navagarajat Gora, Priya Hina Darapat Manamora. Without my beloved, I feel frightened. This is God saying, I mean, at one level to his brother. So it is a relationship which is uh, very very powerful and displayed as such by Tulsidas.
That's very wonderful. That's very inspiring. Uh, Now, the Ramcharitmanas was written a long time back. It is a universal and I would say timeless text. And this relationship that you are showing between man and wife, let's say, is a very beautiful one. What do you think people today, how do you think people today can use it? Because, you know, the reality of life in India and elsewhere in the diaspora is not like that, the relationship between men
Obviously,
and women. There are a lot of problems that
yeah,
we see in the way women are being treated.
I
So on the one hand, we are talking about goddesses. On the other hand, we deal with our women with, as a politician, you know this very well, the many, many problems.
no, there is no doubt that one of the things that should make us look inwards and see the kind of drastic reform that is required is this great dichotomy between our elevation of the feminine principle, call it Shakti, call it Prakriti, call it Maya, to such an exalted level, and the actual treatment of women in real life, which has had a great ancestry of subordination, subjugation, oppression, and discrimination. That's the truth. Now, when you see this in context, you've got to understand even what angers women about Sri Ram and his banishment of Sita, about which you also write evocatively. Let me say a few quick things about that. First of all, Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas ends with the Abhishek and it doesn't have the Uttarkand.
That's right. And I do want to ask you, why do you think Tulsidas ji
Yeah.
ends over there?
Because of several factors, and I will quickly touch upon them. First of all, Valmiki's Ramayana, although far more ancient, written sometime perhaps in the 6th century BCE, before the Common Era, or much before, uh, there is a possibility that sections to it may have been added over a period of time, especially after the 2nd century CE, when attitude to women changed and women lost their earlier sense of near equality with men in ancient Indian society. Why do I say that? You have traditions. The Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad mentions the dialogue between Gargi and Yagnavalkya, where in an open assembly called by King Janak of Videha, of learned people, she, on the terms of complete equality, has a dialogue with the most towering intellectual of that assembly, which was sage Yagnavalkya.
Yes.
It's part. You've seen spirited heroines like Draupadi, who may have been put at stake by in the Mahabharata by uh, Yudhishthir, but who asked in the full assembly of women, did he have the right to lose me? Who did he lose first? Himself or me? And she plays a very powerful role in the Mahabharata. The same Yagnavalkya has a conversation with his wife Maitreyi, where they have a conversation on metaphysics and philosophy. In other words, there are many examples in the past until the Dharam Shastras became a instrument for patriarchy to subjugate women. You know, in Kautilya's Arth Shastra, women could be part of the king's bodyguards. They could join the army. the armed forces. They could be choose to become ascetics. They could, from their own money, donate to temples or to Buddhist viharas. They could join administrative service. Now, this is all mentioned in the Arthashastra, which is of a period prior to the common era, or at least represents the society of that period. So there was a time, but with the coming of the Dharmashastra and with certain sections of the Manusmriti, which I date to around the second century CE, the Manusmriti, which is not a consistent text because the same text talks differently about women at one point and at another point, but there are
Very
texts
true.
which
Very
have
true.
been added which confine a woman to complete subordination to a man. And I think that perhaps that Uttarakand in Valmiki's Ramayana, which talks about the banishment of Sita, could be uh, because there are many texts where there have been additions over a period of time by vested interests. So it could be part of that. A second aspect to this is also important. You know, some people believe that India did not have a philosophy of political science or political theory. The truth is, we did. Kautilya's Arthashastra is there, the Shanti Parv in the Mahabharata is there, there are texts of the Gupta period, the Dharmashastras have it, and so on and so forth. And the Kautilya, in fact, mentions in the Arthashastra that he is writing, analyzing 5 schools of political philosophy and cites 13 other authors before him on this subject. Now, one common thing of that, and there are many aspects to it, I'm only focusing on one, is that the king was bound by the supremacy of dharma. For instance, the Shanti Parv says about the relationship between a king and his subjects. It says specifically, these are the exact words: what is pleasing to them is pleasing to me. Everything that the king has, is for their sake. For his sake, he has nothing. So, in other words, he's bound by what he perceives to be the will of his people. The Arthashastra is equally categorical. The king's good is not that which pleases him, but that which pleases his subjects. So, there is one aspect by which Ram, although himself not inclined in any way to devalue Sita, acts in accordance with what he perceives to be the sense of misgiving in his people, and in order to uphold by certain aspects of political theory at that time, that even though the king is absolute, he is a Chakravartin, he is a Digvijay, he must act in accordance with the will of the people or the dharma prevailing in the land. Dharma also has many interpretations, I'm not going into it. So perhaps Ram, when he banishes Sita, was also responding to that element of political theory. Perhaps Uttarkand was added later. Perhaps it reflected vested interests, by which time, by the second century CE, several centuries after the Ramayana was written, a patriarchy had developed. For whatever reason, Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas does not have this, in many ways, unfortunate last segment.
Right. Tulsidas ji ends at a very happy moment. I see over here that I have many, many um, things more to ask you, but here are our audience questions. And Aruna is asking, we've all grown up hearing our grandmothers recite verses from the Ramcharitmanas in a common sing-song cadence. Where did that come from? And so she just wants to know about that way of singing Ramcharitmanas, and she would like you to recite a verse in that style.
You see, the poetry is of such a quality, the rhyme and meter, that it not only sits easily on your lips, it also lends itself to be remembered for narration. And it is easily set to music, and there is a cadence to it. For instance, again coming back to Sita, when she is afraid that although her love for Sri Ram has become so deep, will he be able to break Shiva's bow? And she goes to the temple of Girija in the Bower. Now look at the powerful poem she narrates there. Jai Jai Giribar Raj Kishori, Jai Mahesh Mukhchand Chakori, Jai Gajabadana Shananan Mata, Jagat Janani Damini Dutgatha, Nahi Tavadi Anta Avsana, Amit Prabhav Ved Nahi Jana. Can you see the cadence of how the rhyme Amit Prabhav Ved Nahi Jana, Bhava Bhava Vibhava Prahava Vakar. Even as you tell it, your hair rises on it. Bhava Bhava Vibhava Prabhava Vakarani, Biswa Bimohani, Swabasa Biharani. Now you can sing it. In my family, whenever the Jamal took place, the ladies of the house gathered round the bride as she is slowly stepping towards her bridegroom. And the role model was Ram and Sita, and she is Sita in that sense. And the ladies used to sing the line I narrated to you, Sakina Madhya Siya Sovati Kaise. I still remember it used to be in Rag Gaman, and the line went like this: Sakina Madhya Siya Sovati Kaise, Chabi Gada Madhya Mahachabi Jaise. So, it lends itself to classical music, to narrative, and to singing.
Yes, that's beautiful. Thank you. I'm very impressed. You are a multi talented person. If anyone ever asked me to sing during one of my events, I would totally not be able to do it. Now, here is a slightly difficult question. I think difficult as in complex. And again, it deals with not really Ramcharitmanas because that part does not deal with Sita's Vanvas. But since you brought it up, this Arundhati Nath is asking, when Sita is being banished, is not Ram abdicating the primary responsibility of a father, because Sita is pregnant at that time, and how can we come to terms with that?
No, there is no doubt that the personal loss, and I am saying this, that Ram may have experienced internally at the banishment of his wife in accordance to what he believed to be public opinion about correct social usage and custom. And let me clarify, I'm not saying it was right. And I don't even know if either Valmiki intended it or it was brought in later by champions of patriarchy. But even if it was there, I think Ram and the love shown for Sita, even in Valmiki, but much more in Tulsidas' Ramcharitmanas, was definitely there, and he didn't need to doubt his wife's fidelity. But it was definitely an act of abandonment of a wife who's pregnant with his children. Now, should he have done it or should he have not? In my view, not. But I just explained to you the political theories of the time and the pressures of patriarchy, which used, by the way, religious texts to give legitimacy to their misconceived misogyny.
Yes, I think you have just made a very big and important point, which we have to, I think, today also really keep in mind, that we cannot kind of bend the scriptures for our purposes in order to create, I don't know, power structures or whatever, power structures that are helpful to ourselves and inimical to other people. So I think that is a great point you've made.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Here's a question for me. In the Forest of Enchantments, Sita isn't an oral narrator. She's writing her biography on palm leaves. What made you choose this medium? Why is she writing? Because I felt that, and of course, I have an advantage to writers of uh, nonfiction, which is I can imagine and I can create. And that is the image that came to me. I wanted to give her the same power and the same, what shall I say, uh, that her work would live on just as Valmiki's work will live on. The Ramayana lives on, the Sitayan lives on. That was the idea and in my work of fiction. But here is one for you. Yes, so here, this is the question from S. Bhuvaneshwari, and she wants to ask about the Maya Sita or Chaya Sita.
Yeah.
And is that in Ramcharitmanas? And what is your thought about the whole idea of Maya Sita?
First of all, I said all, I think, practitioners or those who belong to Hinduism see divinity at two levels. One, where it is nirgun or attributeless, and one where it is given as many attributes as possible. So in the case of Ram, Tulsidas uses many phrases, but he says Aguna and Saguna Doi Brahma Sarupa. Both Nirgun and Aguna are actually the same Brahm. Akata, Agatha, Anadi, Anupa. So they are actually two aspects of the same thing. And the same applies to Sita, who is part of that same Nirgun Brahm. Now, in the Adhyatma Ramayana,
Right, that's where it comes.
yeah, it is said that she was never ever abducted. She put a shadow, her kaya, which was abducted, because ultimately the thought behind this is that divinity remains unaffected by all the antics it goes through in its human avatar, because basically it is transcendent. It is not part of it. It is a participant but an observer quintessentially, because it is above it. So in that sense, Sita remains Sita and Ram remains Ram, and one is Brahm and the other is Maya, and they are here playing a human role. Just like Leela is God playing the fool. And Krishna does it quintessentially well. So you have to understand that there are different Ramayans, and there are many Ramayans, as you know, each of them beautiful in their own way. And essentially, many of them continue to make the point that this is both the story of God and the story of God as a human, which does not affect really the essential transcendentalism, the ontological reality of that God.
Thank you. Thank you. That's beautifully put. And in fact, going back to one of your earlier works, I think Sri Shankaracharya would have seen that right away. And he would have said, not just Ram, not just the great beings, but we ourselves live on those two levels.
Aham Brahmasmi,
Yes.
Tat Tvamasi. And by the way, just as an aside, Adi Shankaracharya believed absolute monism. There is only Brahm and nothing else, and what we see as part of the bewildering plurality of this world is only out of avidya, where we take the unreal for the real and forget the real for the unreal. That is part of the whole notion of dosha, of error of perception. But Adi Shankaracharya said, while this is the only reality, he himself wrote the most moving stotras and hymns of the Shagun gods.
Absolutely.
To Bhavani,
Some of my
to
favorites.
Vishnu, to Shiva, to Parvati, to Ganga. I mean, his Saundarya Lahari, which he writes about the Devi, incidentally, and I come back to the Devi because it's a uniquely Hindu concept. The Saundarya Lahari, which he wrote for Uma, is one of the most powerful and sensual compositions of a metaphysical nature. So, essentially, he said all knowledge is divided into two parts: Paravidya, Aparavidya. Paravidya is absolute knowledge, Aparavidya is preparatory knowledge. During preparatory knowledge, you can pray to any god or goddess, do yoga, do bhakti, go to temple, do ritual, so long as you ultimately are able to silence the sterile cacophony of your mind and reach and understand the ultimate reality, which is Brahma.
Thank you. You put it so beautifully. We have so many great questions here. I'm being told that the session is ended, and but I just want to mention a question, although we won't be able to answer it. It is a great question that I'm sure everyone would have liked to know the answer to, which is that what is your uh, take on Ravan in Ramcharitmanas? But I'm being told that it is time out. So thank you so much. It was lovely to have this conversation with you. And now over to Shanjoy.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Chitra Devakaruni. Pavan, would you like to take that question? A very short answer, if possible, to a very complex
Yeah,
question.
this is a complex question.
Very short answer. Ravan is Ravan at one level, the embodiment of evil at one level. At another level, he's not Ravan at all. You see, please understand that the telling of our great epics and some of our scriptural stories and the Purans are about shadow play. Ram knows exactly what Ravan is. Goes to Vaikunt when killed by Ram. He has done all this play so that Ram actually kills him so that he gets moksha. He's a great Shiva Bhakt. He's aware of exactly what is happening at one level, and yet he pursues this with the aim of achieving moksha at the hands of the Lord, who is Ram.
Or at the hands of Sita in the telling of the other Ramayana, where Sita is supposed to
Yes, indeed.
take the avatar of Durga and kill Ravan. Thank you both. That was fascinating. And we are so glad that now not only do we have an ambassador, a former diplomat, a politician, blah, 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 but also a singer. So that was a new
That was a
discovery.
great moment. That was a great moment.
Absolutely. And what a fascinating discussion. And this is one of the reasons why, after the first session that we did with Pavan Varma, we really wanted to do this as a series to be able to get the different facets from the characters in this very fascinating retelling of the Ramcharitmanas. So, thank you, Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. Thank you, Pavan Varma. Thank you to the Kamini and Vindi Banga Family Trust. And thank you all for watching. And as Chitra said, apologies for not being able to take all the questions, perhaps at the next episode, which will be on Saturday, the 7th of November at 7:30 p.m. Pavan K. Varma again in conversation on a different facet of the Ramcharitmanas. Do remember to log on, meanwhile, to JLF's Brave New World on our ongoing series on Wednesday, 4th November at 7 p.m. Sex and the Supreme Court. How the law is upholding the dignity of the Indian citizen. Saurabh Kripal, Ritu Dalmia, Justice Madan Lokur in conversation with Namita Bhandare. And a quick reminder to block your dates for JLF North America, which will star Nobel laureates, Man Booker, and Pulitzer Prize winners Eric Cornell, Ian Martel, Michael Sandel, William Callum McDaniel, Vijay Shashadri, Stephen Greenblatt, Vikram Chandra, Amish Tripathi, Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, Amish Tripathi, Ira Mukhoti, and 80 other speakers. So do remember, we'll be discussing Black Lives Matter, the elections which would just have concluded, environment, history, science, travel, nation and identity, fiction, and poetry, starting with JLF Colorado 8 to the 11th and 15 to the 18th, JLF Houston 21st to the 22nd of November, New York 23rd and 24th of November, and we conclude with the 27th and 29th of November in Toronto, Canada. Please do remember to check details on jlflitfest.org. Meanwhile, a reminder, please do go and vote if you're in America or in Bihar or Madhya Pradesh or any of these places that are going in for election, remember, mask up and do cast your vote. Thank you. Have a great week.
Thank you, Chitra.